Thank you. Merci. So I want to start off today by talking about the vaccines. Just as we're seeing more information coming forward about the third variant, as we see the numbers rising and the really potential, the serious potential of this variant or the variants in general of spreading like wildfire to create a massive third wave, more than ever, the vaccines are one of the key ways for us to solve this problem, to help people out, people who are worried about their loved ones, people who have compromised immune systems, people who are at risk. The vaccine really is the tool. And I want the vaccine to succeed. It needs to succeed. It is going to be a big part of us getting back to a place where we are beyond this pandemic. But there is clearly a failure at the federal level to secure the doses and to lay out a clear plan to deliver the doses into people's arms. And so when confronted with problems, what we've seen this Liberal government do is to do the minimum required, as opposed to, and what we've been saying every step of the way is we need to be pushing for the most possible. In every respect, we want the most possible support for people and the most possible avenues of ensuring people get vaccinated. We want the most possible for people, not just the minimum. And that really is a difference here. And so that's what we're pushing for. Why we believe we need to have a federal plan for federal vaccination sites and enlisting everyone and anyone who can help in getting people vaccinated is because we want to push for the most possible help for families to get through this. And that's why we're going to continue to fight for that. Donc, dans cette crise, ce qui est tellement évident à ce moment, c'est le fait qu'avec les nouveaux variants de la COVID-19, ça veut dire une potentiel de la propagation de ce virus qui est augmenté. Et pour faire face à cette nouvelle crise avec les nouveaux variants, ce qu'on dit que c'est le gouvernement libéral, le gouvernement en général doit faire le maximum possible. Mais au lieu de ça, on a vu un gouvernement libéral qui veut toujours faire le minimum de ce qui est possible. Et on pousse toujours de faire le maximum possible pour aider les familles. Si on parle de soutien ou appui pour les familles, on veut voir les maximums. Et si on parle de sécurisation et livraison du vaccin, on veut voir le maximum possible pour aider les familles qui ont peur pour l'avenir, qui ont peur pour leurs proches. Pour eux, on va continuer de pousser pour le maximum pour vous aider. Donc, merci. Thank you so much. I'm ready for any questions you might have.
We will now proceed to questions. Nous allons maintenant procéder aux questions. Nous demandons aux journalistes de poser une question suivie. We ask journalists to ask one question and one follow-up. We will start on the phone today. Au téléphone, modérateur.
Oui, merci. Appuyez sur étoile 1 pour toute question. Please press star 1 for questions. La première question, first question, is from Alex Ballingall from the Toronto Star. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Mr. Ballingall, it's been a minute.
Yeah, hi, how's it going?
Good.
That's not my question, by the way. But
and follow-up?
No. My first question is about the gun legislation that was tabled yesterday. I'm sure you guys have had a chance to go over that. Will your party be supporting it, or do you want changes, or are you against it? How do you feel about this new bill?
Certainly. First off, our major priority when it comes to gun legislation is it going to work to protect people? We've seen the impacts of violence where guns were involved that have taken the lives of so many loved ones. And we know that this has deeply impacted communities across our country. We know that there needs to be better protections for people. So that's really our fundamental value. What's going to keep people safe? So there's things after reviewing this legislation that are positive. There are some positive steps around keeping people safe. What we're going to do now is we're going to listen to the debate and listen to the advocates and hear their concerns. What we really want to see happen here is a legislation that keeps people safe. It needs to be done. And there's been lots of calls for real change to make people safer. And we're going to follow closely the debate and also listen to now the response from advocates to see if this is, in their minds, sufficient. We've looked at some of the elements, making a number of assault weapons effectively illegal to own, and clauses that would limit entirely their any use of those weapons. There's some very positive signs there. And there's some interesting elements of supporting the initiatives to stop the smuggling across borders, which we've long called for. So there's some positive there, and we'll take a close look at the debate and as the advocates provide their feedback as well.
So, I mean, a lot of the reaction yesterday from the advocates was that, you know, the voluntary buyback program is unacceptable and that they want to see it mandatory. What do you think about that?
I want it to be effective. So whatever is the most effective way to get these type of weapons off the streets, that's really my goal. And that's why I want to pay close attention to the debate, to hear the advocates' concerns around, is this going to be effective or not? For me, it really comes down to what is going to keep communities safe. If there's a good argument that it needs to be compulsory, we'll listen to that. If there's an argument that there's a way to ensure communities are safe with another alternative mechanism, I want to hear that out. But the end goal has to be we make communities safer. So let's hear all the debate around what's going to make this a better approach to keep people safe.
Next question on the phone.
Thank you. There are no questions. Aucune question pour l'instant.
In the room.
Hi.
Hey there.
Stephanie Levitz, the Canadian Press. Just to stay with the gun bill, is there anything in there you don't like that you think doesn't meet the stated goal and ought to be reconsidered?
One is around the assault weapons, and the previous question from Mr. Ballingal highlighted that advocates are concerned about the question of compulsory or mandatory, or voluntary versus compulsory buybacks, that being one concern. We've raised a concern about giving municipalities, we've taken the position that municipalities should be able to decide if they want to ban handguns, and there should be powers in place that support municipalities that make that decision. That's something that municipalities have called for, we've advocated for as well. And what's in the bill doesn't exactly do that. It gives the power effectively to the province to allow municipalities to do it, which might pose problems in jurisdictions where potentially conservative premiers don't support the municipality's demand to actually ban a handgun. So that's a concern, and there are a number of others that we're going to pay close attention to, really just to hear from the debate and hear from the advocates if they think this is going to work. Our goal is to find a way to keep people safe.
And if I could just pivot back to vaccines and the new NACI recommendations that came out, which included listing First Nations sort of as a broad whole as part of the priority population. But we have the ramp up of Pfizer vaccines, which are exceptionally challenging to get to First Nations communities. So I wonder if you could address that and whether there needs to be some thought given as to we start prioritizing actual vaccines, which is to say Moderna has to go up because, you know, First Nations are on that list, and so on, when you talk about doing better. And
yeah, absolutely. So I think what we're up against now is for the most vulnerable people, all the experts are saying they have to be the priority. And we have to acknowledge as well, in that category of vulnerable people, that Indigenous people are vulnerable through no fault of their own because of historic injustice and colonialism that has meant that Indigenous communities have less access to healthcare, they have less access to housing, they are higher risk directly as a result of injustice that they faced. And so because of the injustice they faced, when we talk about reconciliation, it is not enough to talk about it. To walk the path means that the people that are some of the most vulnerable, because of injustice they faced and continue to face, have to be a priority. And that will mean an approach, a strategy that takes that into consideration. If we are going to walk this path of reconciliation, then vulnerable communities need extra help. Indigenous communities in remote and distant communities that cannot have the Pfizer vaccine because of the difficulties of storage have to be a priority, and we've got to make clear decisions that then satisfy the need of getting those communities vaccinated. And that means making sure we've got the right vaccine for those communities. Absolutely. That has to be a part of the plan. And part of the reason why we're saying that the Liberal government has failed is that they haven't laid out a clear path to getting to this goal. If the goal is to make sure Indigenous communities are vaccinated, and First Nations communities and rural and remote communities, then where is the plan to achieve that? It's not something that we can see right now. And that's why I've been raising the alarm bells, saying we've got to do better. This Liberal government's got to take this seriously. Local production, a clear plan, getting the military involved, getting federal vaccination sites set up, everything possible to achieve our goal of getting everyone vaccinated, but particularly the most vulnerable.
Prochaine question dans la salle, Mackenzie.
I'm Mr. Sang, Mackenzie Gray with CTV.
Hey
Do you
there.
think China's
You threw
treatment
me off with the
That's okay.
different side.
Do you think China's treatment of the Uyghurs constitutes a genocide?
Yes.
If you think that, then how can Canada continue to trade with China? Is it your position that we should continue with what's going on if we think there's a genocide? Because if we don't take any concrete actions against that, how do we think we're going to impact any change?
We need to have dialogue. We need to continue to use our diplomatic channels to achieve the goal of justice for everyone. I believe that you keep dialogue open, you keep the doors open to communication. Given the mounting evidence, it's clear what's happening to the Uyghur people meets that definition. And we need to do everything we can to use the platform that we have to fight for the preservation and their security and safety.
That's good.
Okay. Hi, Mr. Singh, David Thurton from CBC News. Do you have any concerns about sending in the military to help with the vaccination effort, given that eco-socialists, have concerns with that, and some are calling for a world where we're increasingly demilitarized?
We have incredibly talented people in the Canadian forces that want to serve their country and so we have this resource, they've got the capacity and they've got the know-how to assist. And in many disasters, we have seen the military come through in incredible ways to support Canadians. A number of times when we've seen natural disasters, the Canadian forces have been there. And they're already involved right now in the delivery and support for Indigenous communities. I absolutely believe that this resource, that these people can help in getting the vaccine to all Canadians. The broader question of a future or a world where we move away from militarization or we move away from war is absolutely, I would love to see a world where there is no war and that there's many steps in initiative towards working to ban or to get rid of nuclear weapons, disarmament. These are important things for us to do as a world. Of course, I absolutely believe in that we need to move to a world where we're no longer ever at war. Right now, we've got a resource and it should be used towards keeping Canadians safe.
But you're using an organization, an arm of our government that is particularly dedicated to a combat role, primarily, to do something that a public health care system has been tasked to do. So what do you want to say to people within your party, within that eco-socialist base, that are concerned that you're adopting this approach?
I think the Canadian forces have shown that their history has been one where they've been a force for good. Very clearly, our history as a nation has been one where we've been at the forefronts of peacekeeping, and we've got a rich legacy of being a force for good in the world and also a force for good in Canada. So I believe that this is the right thing to do, to take the talent and skill of Canadians that have enlisted to serve their country and to ask them to do something to further help Canadians is absolutely in line with what they're intended to do and what they want to do and what they're able to do. I think it's absolutely appropriate for the forces to use their skill sets to help Canadians in this time, as they've done many times in the past.
We will check once again on the telephone. Nous allons vérifier sur le téléphone pour des questions.
Alex Bellingham from the Toronto Star, à vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Hey, thanks very much for bringing me back on. Just going back to the gun stuff.
Sure.
So on the municipal handgun bans, you mentioned that you didn't like it didn't go far enough, I guess. But some cities like Toronto City Council and other gun control advocates have called for a national handgun ban, that would just be the easier way to do this instead of having sort of the patchwork of potential municipal restrictions. There would just be a blanket ban. What do you think of that?
It's certainly been advocated for, but municipalities have also said that give us the ability to make that decision. It would help us immediately, and it would avoid the potential differences that, in some communities, it's not an issue, but in other urban cities, it's a major issue. So providing that flexibility would get to the heart of the matter directly. It's something that we've called for before because of the support for it. And the current legislation doesn't give any of that support to municipalities specifically. It gives the decision-making to the provinces, and it doesn't allow a city like Toronto to make that decision because it would be in their best interest. And if they wanted to make that decision, they are unable to with this legislation. That's a concern that we've raised.
So how would you, I guess, address that concern? It seems like that's like almost like a constitutional division of powers thing. How would you address that without going for a national ban if it's the provinces that sort of have authority over what cities can legislate?
There's certainly ways to figure out a mechanism to support a municipality. One mechanism that's been suggested is federal regulations that match the municipal bylaws. So if a municipality passes a bylaw, that we have got federal regulations that support that. But really, it's about the will to get it done. If government, and if in this case we can push the Liberal government to accept that there are municipalities that want to make this decision, we can find a tool to allow them to make that decision. And I think that's really what it comes down to: the having the volition or the willingness to support what many municipalities, particularly large urban municipalities, are calling for.
Do we have any further questions on the phone?
No further question. Il n'y a plus de questions.
Back to the room.
Steph again, back on the gun bill again. I wonder if you could address the rural folks in your caucus and more rural members of the party who might be vehemently against this legislation, and what you say to them.
Well, the intent here is very clearly to ban assault weapons that are designed specifically with the intent to not for hunting, not for livelihood, but very much to target another human. These are weapons that don't have a place in society, in our country, and we've seen a lot of pain when we look at the recent attacks in Nova Scotia. We think about the historic, but still very brightly in our memory, École Polytechnique. These are devastating attacks and weapons that have been able to effectively take a lot of lives, and we know that this is something that we need to protect people with. This type of legislation will protect people, and it's important that there's a distinction between hunting and traditional ways of living and living off the land, and a recreation or a hobby that is something that's very much a part of Canadian culture versus and the heritage here, versus weapons that are designed to take lives in that way, and the pain that has been caused by them. I think there's a clear distinction there.
Do you have members of your caucus, though, who will just not want to vote in favor of this bill in any capacity?
We've not had any concern so far.
Thank you. That ends the conference.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.